We'll be starting in just a minute at noon. So those of you that are here, if you would put in the chat box something that you've recently planted in your edible garden, just to get us started here on the topic. So something you've recently planted in your edible garden, put it in the chat box. Peas, great. Certainly time for peas. We'll be starting in just 1 minute. Peppers, onions, and tomatoes already. Wow, that's pretty early for tomatoes, but lettuce, greens, figuring out what I can plant. Okay, well, we'll get you started on that. These are what I have posted on the screen right now are some of our upcoming seminars for the edible gardening group as part of the Master Gardener program. So if you're interested in some of these, to register is the website at the bottom, HTTPS. So on April, we'll be doing seed starting, June, tips on irrigating your edible garden, July, planting a fall winter garden, and August, growing culinary herbs. These will all be online on Zoom on Mondays at 12 to 1. So same time as this one. So if you're interested, please sign up for those also. Strawberries. Okay. So today's topic is going to be growing your edible garden. And my name is Juliet Bender, and I'm a member of the OSU Lane County Master Gardeners. And I'd like to welcome you to our edible gardening seminar series, of which this is the first. Questions will be handled at the end of the talk, but feel free to put in any questions in the Q&A box. Don't put it in the chat, put it in the Q&A box at any time. And then Erica will coordinate those questions at the end. Also for today's talk, there's closed captioning is available. It can be turned on and off with the CC button at the bottom or top of your screen. On mine, it's the top. So I think that's all the housekeeping issues for now. Again, my name is Juliet Bender, and I'm going to be introducing you to the joys of growing your own edible garden. And I will discuss the basics of creating a garden plot and then planting and maintaining it throughout the season. And I've been an OSU Lane County Master Gardener since 2013. Since that time, I've specialized in plant diagnostics and sustainable landscape, and I've served on the LCMGA board in various capacities. And in 2023, I started this new group of edible gardening. So, growing your edible garden. I also wanted to let you know about a couple of free compost workshops that are coming up. In April 20th, we have a free compost workshop coming up at 10 o'clock to noon. And for soil testing, which I will be talking about a little bit later, we do have a soil testing where you can bring your soil to the OSU Extension office, which the address is listed there, on April 6th from 1 to 4, and it would be $2 per soil testing. So that is a great way to find out what the pH level of your soil is. And then finally, we have our annual plant sale, the Master Gardener plant sale, coming up on April 27th at the fairgrounds. So it's a great place to come and buy your starts or buy your trees, shrubs, perennials. We'll have it all there. So I wanted to start with an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. And this is basically going to be in 10 steps. I'm going to describe how you can set up your edible garden. First of all, we're going to talk about the location, and you definitely need a sunny location. We'll talk about vegetables, how to select those vegetables that you want to eat. Then thinking about ordering seeds or buying starts, designing the layout of your edible garden, because there are some things to consider when you plant your seeds or seedlings, how to prepare that soil, and then creating also a schedule for planting the seeds and starts, because there are certain vegetables you need to start at different times of the year. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the idea of water, fertilizing, and weeding throughout the growing season. So we will cover all of those topics during this hour talk. So first of all, we will talk about finding the right location for your edible garden. And as I mentioned, a sunny location is critical, especially for all those warm season crops like peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers. They need basically a minimum of 8 hours of sunshine. So you do need to find a very sunny area of your yard that can give you that amount of sun. You also want it to be near your house so that it's easily accessible, so you don't have to walk a long distance to maintain it. You want to obviously have a nearby water source so that you don't have to carry buckets of water to water your raised bed or your vegetable garden. Also, if you're a beginning vegetable gardener, I would suggest that you start small. You can even start with containers, and I'll talk about what you can grow in containers later on. But starting small is good because it will require a lot less time and a lot less maintenance. So that is something to consider if you are a new edible gardener. And then you need to think about having where you have fertile, well-drained soil. A lot of us probably have clay. I certainly have clay in my yard. So it would be hard for me to grow root vegetables in my clay. So either I would need to mound up my soil or else have a raised beds. And I have raised beds in my yard, 4 raised beds. But you can certainly mound up the soil and grow vegetables there also. But you just need to make sure you have good, fertile, well-drained soil for your vegetables to grow in. So these are 2 of my raised beds in my yard. They're cedar wood. They're pretty high. They're probably about 3 feet high, so I don't have to bend over that far to work in them. And they're 4 by 8 feet, 4 feet by 8 feet, which I think is a good size. If they're any wider than 4 feet, it's hard to get to the middle of the raised bed. So they can certainly be longer than 8 feet, but I would recommend 4 feet as the width. For raised beds, you can grow a lot more in less space. I usually plant my raised beds pretty densely, as you can probably see in this picture, and there'll be others that will show as well. And it's much easier to amend the soil in a raised bed because you have a certain amount of soil and I usually add more soil, more compost, more fertilizer every year to my raised beds because the soil does deplenish over the course of the year. So I usually add more soil, more compost, and more fertilizer at the beginning of each year, of each growing season. And if you're using containers, you'll need to add fresh soil every year and more fertilizer because that will leach out. Fish emulsion is a good thing to use, especially if you're having containers or compost. But adding new soil and compost and fertilizer is pretty critical for each year adding those. There are many different types of raised beds you can have. As I said, mine are wood, but you can use straw bales. You can use metal, concrete blocks. There are a lot of options that you can use, or just mound the soil. That is obviously a less expensive way to do it. Now for Oregon and Eugene, this shows the USDA plant hardiness zone map. And it shows that Eugene is 8B as far as the zones are concerned. So that is something to consider when you're thinking about when to plant your vegetables, that we are 8B. And our estimated frost dates for 2024 are April 25th is the last one for the season, and the first one is October 15th. Although I would take that April 25th date with somewhat of a grain of salt, because I usually don't plant my tomatoes until mid-May, basically, at least outdoors in my raised beds. I start them from seed, obviously, much sooner, but I don't plant them outside until mid-May, usually. Same with peppers, etc. So step 2 is thinking about what type of vegetables you want to grow. And this is something that you want to think about as to what you like to eat. You don't want to grow things that you don't like to eat. If you don't like Brussels sprouts, then don't grow Brussels sprouts. But I usually think about each year what things I like to eat, and also you might consider some of the more expensive vegetables that are more expensive at the grocery store, that it's cheaper to grow your own. So that might be a consideration for you too, as to what you want to grow in your garden. But some of the easier vegetables to grow, I've listed here: beans, peas, beets, lettuce, radishes, tomatoes. So if you're a beginning gardener, it might be something that you want to consider growing some of these first, just to get your used to growing things from seed. And think about herbs also. Some of the perennial herbs are great because they come back every year, like rosemary or oregano. Those are great that you can just put them in the ground and then you'll have them for years to come. So think about those also. And there also certainly are perennial vegetables too, like artichokes and asparagus, that you might want to think about growing as well. The next step would be to order your seeds. Now, there are a lot of different seed companies that you can order them from. Territorial is one of our local ones, but there's Johnny's and Baker Creek Heirloom, but they are all great companies to order seeds from. And I love looking through seed catalogs just to look at their varieties, because there's so many different varieties of beans, of peas. For example, this is one that tomato that's from Baker Creek, the tomato prairie fire, which I'm going to try for the first time this year. One whole bean that I really like is that I just discovered last year. If you can see this, Seychelles pole beans. They're snap pole beans, and they were great. They didn't get too thick, too fat. They stayed nice and slender throughout the whole growing season. So I love that about them. So experiment with different seed companies as to what you might like. And then I would recommend buying small quantities, small amounts, like one package. You don't need to buy a huge amount because they do expire. They don't last forever. So buy what you need. for the year that you're going to plant them. And if you have extras, give them away to friends, so that you can experiment with a couple of different ones. And always store your seeds in a cool, dry location. That's the best place. You don't want to leave them in a hot area or humid area. And before you start planting, I would recommend reading everything that's written on the back. There's a lot of information on the back of a seed package about how to grow them, how to fertilize them, various requirements, if you should direct sow or start indoors. So there's lots of information on the back of a seed package. So think about that too before you start planting your seeds. And one thing about growing things from seed is that you have so much more variety for what you'll grow. You usually don't see all these varieties of cauliflower in the grocery store, but you can find these in seed catalogs, and you have so many different colors, sizes of vegetables that you'll find, very unusual ones in a seed catalog. Like this tomato, this prairie fire tomato. I mean, I'd never heard of this before. I saw it in the Baker Creek heirloom catalog. So there are just lots and lots of different varieties. So you consider that when you're thinking of growing your own vegetables, as to all the different varieties that are available to you. The next step then would be to prepare the soil. And this is where testing your soil becomes pretty important, because most vegetables like pH between 6.2 and 6.8. And around here, since we have so much rain, our soil can be more acidic, and that's what this is. It's acidic soil, but it's good to test it. 7 is neutral. So it's good to test just to see once whether your soil is in this range or not. So again, as I mentioned, we are having a soil test coming up April 6th, 1 to 4. So if you're interested in doing that, I would recommend getting your soil tested. And then you need to amend the soil with about an inch or so of organic materials before planting, based on what you got back from your soil pH test. And then add some sort of balanced fertilizer before planting. Balanced meaning, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then you also want to monitor for any pests, because a lot of times you can find slugs around this time of year. So it might be a good idea just to see if there are some around. And you can test by either putting yeast out or beer out to draw them to your raised beds, just because they will feed on your tender seedlings once you put them out. So you want to prepare for that possibility before you put your tender seedlings out. The next step is to design a layout for your edible garden. And this is pretty important, because you want to decide what goes where and kind of give it some thought as to why you're doing what you're doing. Think about height. Tall things, generally, we recommend planting on the north side of a garden, so they don't shade out the rest of your raised bed, unless you want it to. For example, you can think about what things need sun. So example, tomatoes will need a lot of sun. So you'll want that tomatoes in the sunniest area. But lettuce will need less sun. So maybe you'll want to put it in a shadier spot behind some vegetables, so they are in a less hot areas, because once lettuce gets too warm too quickly, it will start to bolt. So you can think about that as to the height of vegetables, how tall they're going to get, their need for sun, and also the support requirements for them. For example, I have my peas on trellises that I put in my garden, and then the peas will climb up those trellises. I'll tie them on to the trellis. I put my cucumbers can grow on an A-frame. Beans I usually grow on bamboo poles, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. Tomatoes, depending on what type they are, my indeterminate tomatoes, which are like cherry tomatoes, I will grow in a cage, and my determinate tomatoes I will grow on stakes. Peppers can grow on stakes as well, but it's not critical for peppers as much as tomatoes. So think about the support requirements that you'll need. If things are growing up, they'll obviously take a lot less room in your garden than if they're growing out. So I do recommend thinking about growing vertically in an edible garden. And I think it's also important to keep a journal as to when and where you plant your vegetables so you can compare from year to year as to when you started, when you planted your seeds, when you moved your seedlings outdoors, where you planted them. That can become critical with plant rotation as to where you planted them in your raised beds or your mounded soil. That becomes quite critical. So keeping a journal is very important from year to year of just some of the very key statistics. This is my pole bean here. You can see me. And I have 3 bamboo poles in the middle here. 3, then I plant my pole beans at the base, 1 on either side of the bamboo poles. I think I should have 6 plants here, which you can see it's pretty dense. 3 could probably work too. And as you can see, it gets quite tall. It isn't a raised bed. I do plant my pole beans in a raised bed, and but they do get quite tall. I'm sorry. And then over on this side, you can see my cages, barely, but you can see my cages. These are my tomatoes here, and I plant them pretty densely. These are all my cherry tomatoes that are grown in the cages, the indeterminate tomatoes that are grown in the cages. And these are my determinate tomatoes, which are more like the slicers or the sauce tomatoes, which are grown on stakes. And then I think these are probably peppers that are also grown on stakes. So it just gives you an idea as to how you can grow some of these vertically as well. So this is a slide. Step 6 is just to start planting your seeds. And this slide shows you when to start indoors and what to start indoors and what can go directly into the soil. So let's start with the warm season. These are both warm season on the left and cool season crops on the right. So the warm season crops are like the tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, eggplant. Those you can all start indoors in this time of year, March, April. You can plant the seeds indoors and then move them outdoors in May. As I said, I usually move mine outdoors mid-May. I check the temperatures to see that there's not going to be any really cold nights. I will harden those seeds, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then I'll move them outside to my raised beds, usually by mid-May. So all of these, you can start the seeds indoors now. And then on the other side are the cool season crops. And those you can start the seeds plant them directly in the soil now, the cool season crops. So peas, a lot of people have planted peas already. I have my snow peas already planted. I have lettuce out there, I have onions, but all of these are available for you to plant now in the soil, outdoors, in your raised beds. That gives you an idea of what to plant when and where. What I do is I usually plant my cool season crops together in 2 raised beds and my warm season crops in 2 other raised beds. I have 4 raised beds altogether, but it's just easier for me to do it that way. But you can certainly mix them too. If you have less room, you can mix them. But my 2 raised beds that I use for cool season crops gets less sun than the 2 I use for the warm season crops. So that's why I usually put the cool season crops in the raised beds that get less sun, because most of these cool season crops don't need as much sun as the warm season crops do. So that is the planting of the seeds. And then this gives you an idea as to how to sow the seeds indoors. And I will show you in a minute what I use as my containers, etc. But you can use peat pots, you can use egg cartons. There are lots of different things you can use. Containers that you get takeout food in. There are lots of different ways that you can use as containers to sow your seeds in. But you need to make sure that your seed starter mix is moist when you put it into the containers, and it's watered thoroughly, not drenched, but certainly moist. When you first start, you need to cover the container and put it in a warm location until the seeds germinate. And you need to check them daily. Once the seeds start germinating, then you uncover the container and you add a bright light source. And you keep those seedlings close to the light. And then fertilize. I usually use fish emulsion for my fertilizing I probably do it every week, but you can do it every 2 weeks. Watering from below is helpful, so you don't, especially when the seedlings are very small, you can topple them over if you water from above or displace them. And then if you want, you can thin the seedlings if needed, depending on how many come up per cell. But if you only have 2 or 3, I usually keep those and then just separate them out once they get big enough. And then, of course, you need to harden them by gradually introducing the seedlings to sunlight before planting them outdoors. That process usually takes up to 5 days, 5-6 days, where first day you take it out and the seedlings outside for an afternoon of not bright sunlight, but sort of in a lighter sunlight area, and then take them inside in the evening, then outside again in more direct sunlight the next day, take them in again, then take them out the 3rd day and leave them out all day in the sunlight, maybe take them in again that night, and then the next day you can leave them out all day and night for 2 more days and nights, and then they're ready to be planted outdoors. So that's the hardening process. So what I use for soil is something like it's in the picture. I think it is exactly. It's you have to have a seed starting mix. So something that says seed starting potting mix is really critical. You can't use just regular soil. You can't use container soil. You have to have something very lightweight. It's the soilless mix is what it is. So I would definitely get something like this. That's a seed starting potting mix. And what I use is peat pots for mine. A lot of people use plastic containers, but I will use a tray like this with the peat pots in there. I put the soil in, get it very wet. I'll moisten my soil before I even put it in a bucket because the seed starting mix is very, very dry. So I will moisten it in a bucket first, get it pretty wet, then put it in here. Moisten it once more because you want to make sure these peat pots are wet too. Then plant the seeds. And then depending on what the package says, either cover them with soil or not, depending on what that says. And then I will put on the top this humidity dome. But you can put plastic, put something over the top to keep them moist. And you only need to do that, as I mentioned, until they start germinating. And then once they start germinating, even if it's only a quarter of them start germinating, take it off immediately. Because then you want to put them under bright light. I have fluorescent lights. I do it in my laundry room, and I have fluorescent light in there anyway. So I just put them under that fluorescent light, and I have bought one small LED light that I just put another tray under as well. So those are the ways that I use a light, and you need to keep the seedlings pretty close to the light so they don't get too spindly, especially initially. And then as they grow taller, you can move the light up, or I just put them on boxes, um, so that when they get taller, I just take the boxes away, so they're further away from the light because they're getting taller. So that's basically the way that I grow my seeds. You want to make sure that they never dry out. So you want to keep monitoring the moisture level. And as I said, I usually water from below because these peat pots, you want to make sure they have holes in them so that they will soak up the water. And another critical thing is that you need to make sure you label your cells as to what's planted in each one or each row. So make sure you've created your labels. I usually do that first. So I have all my labels ready. Then as I do plant my seeds, I will label that row or that cell with whatever's been planted in there because they will look alike, so it's easy to get them confused. So make sure you label with the variety, not just tomatoes, but it's good to say what type of variety that tomato is too, so you know what you put in that cell or that row. And then I mentioned about the hardening and taking it outside once your seedlings are ready to be transplanted. Sometimes it happens that the weather changes and it gets too cool and you'll need to protect your crops. Or else if you've planted something outdoors that might not be as frost resistant, then you'll need to either create a cloche like this is, or you can do a milk jug as well, just putting it over the plant for that evening, or a row cover such as remade, just putting that over the top of the area that you're concerned about, the seedlings that you're worried about might get frostbitten, or else in a cold frame, which is something like this. You can put them in there, and that's usually what I do when my tomatoes and peppers have been hardened and it may not yet be time for them to go outside into my raised beds, I will put them in a cold frame that I have outside. I usually put the cold frame out a week or so before I start putting my vegetables in there so that it gets acclimated to the temperature. And then I put my tomatoes and peppers in there Usually I leave it open during the day. It has like a opening here that opens up. I'll leave it open and then I'll close it at night so that it stays warm at night but gets the sun during the day. And then when I'm ready and the temperatures are ready, I will put it out in my raised beds. And that's usually what I do for cucumbers, tomatoes, and peppers, is have this extra step of a cold frame. So then this is talking about our cool season crops, of which I've listed the ones there: carrots, beets, lettuce, beans, and peas. These are some of the cool season crops. And as I mentioned, these you can plant the seeds directly outdoors now. And it's basically the same. You need to prepare the beds by amending the soils. You can plant the seeds. There are various ways you can do it. You can do it in rows. You can stagger the rows. You can plant them in hills if it's like a squash. So there are various ways that you can plant the seeds, and then usually just lightly cover them with soil. But again, you'll need to read the package of the seed package to see how they recommend it. Sometimes it's hard to control the number of seeds planted, so you may need to thin them afterwards if you get too many, by either, probably not pulling them out, but either pinching them off or cutting them off is a good way to do it. Or you can use seed tapes, and you can create your own seed tapes by using toilet paper and using flour and water and just putting the seeds on the toilet paper, and then they're just planting it into the soil. So that's one way. If you want to space them more accurately, you can either buy seed tapes or create your own by doing that method. Then if you've decided that maybe growing seeds isn't the way you want to proceed, you can certainly buy starts. There are many available in all our garden centers and nurseries around here. For if you're buying starts, then you can obviously start later. You don't need to grow from seeds. So you can buy your cool season plants right now and plant them in the ground. They are available in our nurseries. But I would recommend trying to grow some things from seed because it's a fun process. It can be frustrating perhaps if it may not work out all of them the first time, but try it. It's fun to do, and when you see those seeds start germinating, it's quite a thrill actually. So I would recommend trying to grow some things from seed. For the warm season plants, you would buy those in May at the garden centers. I wouldn't recommend buying them too early, because then you have to figure out where to store them, because you're not going to be able to plant them directly outdoors until probably mid-May. So you'll need to keep them in a warm spot in the house or in your garage until mid-May comes, or yeah, early May to mid-May. So also, as I mentioned, our Master Gardener plant sale is coming up April 27th. We will have lots of starts there, tomatoes. We'll have many, many varieties of tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers. So come and see what we've got. And we have bare trees, roots. We'll have all kinds of shrubs, perennials, annuals, hanging plants. It will be at the fairgrounds, and we will be inside in the area where the livestock generally is during the fair. So come and see what we've got. April 27th. I think the times are 10 to 3. So also you need to be careful of, as I mentioned, the last spring frost date. So which is April 25th, as that earlier slide mentioned. Step 8 is to consider intensive planting. This is something, if you've been gardening for a little while, you may want to consider one of these techniques, because you can grow a lot more in a limited space if you use some of these techniques. And the techniques are succession planting, interplanting, and vertical planting. And I'll talk about each of those different techniques. It will require a little bit more planning to use these techniques, but I think it's a great way to grow a lot more in a small area. So succession planting is basically harvesting 2 or more crops from the same space in one season. So you're planting something new in the harvested area. So say, for example, you've planted radishes. Radishes only take basically a month or so before you can harvest them. It's a very quick crop. So once you've harvested those radishes, you'll want to plant something new. So you need to think about it, though, in advance. Plan for that. Either you'll have seedlings ready to go and to put in that space, or you can plant more radishes in there, but you still need to think about it. You don't want to leave an empty space in your garden if you want to maximize the ground, the soil in your raised bed. So you could, for example, start with a cool season crop like lettuce or peas or radishes. And then once those come out, then you can put in a warm season crop like tomatoes or cucumbers until they come out. And then you could put in the fall, you could put in some sort of cool season crop again. So, so you just need to determine the length of the growing season for each of the vegetables that you're putting in. So some of the plants that are suitable for this are any type of greens, the arugula, spinach. Those all come out pretty early in the season because they will bolt when it gets too warm. So after their time is over, you'll need to think of something else to put in there. Beets and carrots, I usually leave my beets and carrots in for quite a while, actually, but you can pull those out earlier. I usually plant a bunch and then take them out gradually. Radishes, as I mentioned, will come out pretty quickly because they'll be ready to harvest. And shallots also can come out pretty easily. The bigger onions I leave those in for pretty much the whole growing season and then take them out as I need them. And when they're small, I'll take them out and I'll plant those somewhat thickly so that I can take some out almost as shallots, as smaller onions, and then leave the others to grow larger in a larger space. So you can think about how you want to do your succession planting, but it's a great way to use your space in your raised beds or your mounds. Another way is to interplant your vegetables. And this is basically growing 2 or more vegetables in the same space at the same time. So for example, I mentioned radishes are very short, but carrots are much longer. So you can plant your radishes and carrot seeds very close together. And then your radishes will be out much sooner than your carrots will be ready. So you'll take your radishes out and then your carrots will have more room to grow larger. But that gives you more space to grow more vegetables if you do it that way. And same with pole beans and lettuce. As you saw, my pole beans got very tall, but lettuce, which is more shade tolerant, you can grow it at the base of the pole beans. to use up some of that space that may not be that you may not be growing anything in. So you can grow your lettuce at the base of those pole beans or around the edges of them where it's shadier. So think about that as you plan how you're going to plant your vegetables. This is one method that the Three Sisters method, which I think is a great one, where you start with corn, and then that's the oldest sister, so to speak, and then you plant the squash at the base, and it grows over the mound, and then the beans will basically wind up the corn stalk. So it's a way to grow 3 different vegetables in a very tight area. And this is a method that's been used for centuries in various Latin American countries and other parts of the world. Vertical gardening, I've already talked about, but you can grow a lot more by using trellises, A-frames, bamboo poles, etc. It's just a great way to grow vegetables. And containers, you can grow a lot in containers. You can grow leafy greens, you can grow herbs, you can grow what are called patio varieties of vegetables. They're usually smaller types of vegetables. You can find them usually in seed catalogs. They're called patio varieties, but they just are plants, vegetables that grow smaller, that can be grown in small containers. You can grow determinate tomatoes in containers, such as slicers or sauce tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes, the indeterminate, I would probably not grow in a container because they do get fairly large and unwieldy. But the determinate ones grow with a main stalk, so it's easier just to put a stake in there and grow those determinate tomatoes in a container. But again, you'll need to make sure you change the soil every year in your containers, increase your fertilizer and water often when you're using containers. Then step 9 is obviously making sure that you keep your beds watered. I recommend watering deeply, not frequently, 1.5 inches per week. And it's good to water the soil, not the leaves. And in the morning, I usually use a drip irrigation in my raised beds. I fertilize usually before planting, but there are some crops that may require some extra fertilizer during the growing season, such as beets, lettuce, broccoli, tomatoes. Some of those I will apply a second set of application of fertilizer when the blossoms come up. So, but definitely fertilize before you plant. And then check for pests. And if you find a disease, we do have a plant clinic that you can bring in some leaves or pictures of what might be happening in your garden. If you think an insect is eating something or a disease, some sort of fungus is getting into some of your vegetable plants, bring them in and we can help answer those questions. And then, of course, weeding regularly is critical as well. And then the last step is to harvest. These are some of the cool season crops and the warm season crops. And I would recommend that you pick often, because when you stop picking something like a pea or a bean, the plant will think that it's stopped for the year and it will not continue to grow more vegetables on it. So continue to pick. I usually try and go out every day or every other day to pick vegetables. It will continue to produce good beans or peas if you do pick regularly. And for the lettuce, I usually just pick off a leaf. At a certain point in the season, then I'll cut off the whole head. of the leaf lettuce. So, but at the beginning of the season, I'll just usually pick off leaves. And then one last thing about crop rotation, which is pretty important. I mentioned that it's important for you to keep a journal as to where you plant things, because you can get buildup of pests or diseases in the soil. So you do want to rotate your crops um, at least 3 years if you can, before you're growing the same vegetable in the same location. And I've listed some of the crops that are important for crop rotation. So you can look at broccoli, cauliflower. Some of the brassicas are pretty critical that you rotate those crops, because you can get some pretty serious diseases in the soil if you grow them year after year in the same soil. This is just a saying that I like. Anyone who thinks that gardening begins in the spring and ends in the fall is missing the best part of the year, for gardening begins in January with the dream, or in March. And these are some of the OSU publications that are available. I've listed the number on there, and you can find them at that website for the OSU Extension website. The Vegetable Gardening in Oregon and Growing Your Own are both great as publications. I give you a lot of information, so I would recommend you look for those online, because they are excellent resources. So I think we're ready for questions. I think we have a few minutes for questions. So
great. Thank you, Juliet. Appreciate that. I did put a link to the Growing Your Own publication in the chat box, so folks can go in there and access that. Rose has answered a few of the questions, but I'll sort through and see if I can pick out a few more. So someone was asking if there's any produce not to use fish emulsion on. Juliet, do you have thoughts on that?
Any produce to not use fish emulsion with? I don't think so. I mean, I use it with basically everything. I think it's a great fertilizer. So I would use it pretty much with anything. I put it on all my seed starts as I'm growing them. I think it's a great addition for the seeds as I grow them to use fish emulsion. I will just put a little bit in a watering can, and then add a lot of water to it, so it's pretty diluted, and I'll just water the plants with that fish emulsion mix that I make.
Yeah, and I would just add that I tell people don't use them on house plants, because otherwise your house will smell like fish emulsion.
Oh, that's true.
I would
That's
be careful about using it as like a foliar fertilizer on something like kale close to harvest. I don't know what that would do. Certainly any leafy vegetable that you plan on eating, I would be personally a little weary about using it as a foliar fertilizer, but it's certainly okay as a soil drench. There's a follow-up question saying, is there anything that doesn't want nitrogen? I'll just say no. There pretty much every plant needs
right.
nitrogen. It's the most needed nutrient of all of them. So yeah, all plants need nitrogen. Someone was asking about the USDA zone for Florence. Rose was great and answered that. Florence is 8B, Florence to Cape Blanco is 9A, and Cape Blanco to Brookings is 9A as well.
Okay.
Let's see. Someone said they haven't had good luck with cauliflower. Any tips?
I don't usually grow cauliflower, so I grow broccoli, which is, I guess, similar to the cauliflower. The only problem I've had with broccoli is the aphids that get on broccoli. See, what is the problem that they have with cauliflower? I
You weren't
wonder.
given anything besides just that they haven't had good luck. Rose did state that you might want to try a shorter growing season, a variety that has a growing, a shorter growing season, and then make sure it has large leaves that you can use to blanch your heads. So, yeah,
Yeah, for broccoli, sometimes I will start those from seedlings that I buy so that I start them earlier that way so they have a longer growing season. Because I don't always get my broccoli started from seed that early. But yeah, you do want to make sure it has enough growing season for it to mature. And the aphids, I that's the main thing I have the problem with my broccoli is I will just spray it with water. But yeah, it can be a problem with broccoli.
do you have issues with the imported cabbage worm or cabbage butterfly with
No,
broccoli?
no, I don't.
Someone was asking about that. It's probably the imported cabbage worm or cabbage butterfly. Those are the two green caterpillars that tend to attack broccoli and other brassicas. Hand picking is obviously honestly the most easiest thing to do. Just look on the undersides of leaves and pick off all those little green larvae. You can either squish them with your fingers, or if that sounds gross to you, drop them into a jar of soapy water. If you decide you want to, you can also use row covers to protect the plants because basically the moths and the butterflies that fly around are the ones that lay eggs. So if you can prevent them from landing on the plant and laying eggs by using a floating row cover, then you may lessen the issues that you have. Do you have any comments on companion planting, Julia?
Companion planting, yeah. I usually grow, for example, my basil and tomatoes together. Supposedly that's supposed to repel the thrips if you do that. Marigolds and broccoli is supposedly a good companion planting because that will repel the aphids. And that's something I'm going to try this year is to add my marigolds very close to my broccoli because I have had problems with that in the past. And I've also radishes and cucumbers or something that um, could possibly keep the cucumber beetles by having radishes. There has been some studies done. Some of this is more myths or wives, but there is something also from Washington State University has a companion planting, what you should plant together. So there are various things online that you can look for that have more scientific techniques as to what people have figured out will grow together and provide some protection from pests or diseases.
Great, thank you. And Rose put a link to an article from University of Minnesota on
Okay.
companion planting. So I'll go ahead and just throw that into the chat box.
Okay.
And
Right.
the final question is, if transplants are going into a greenhouse, do they need to be protected by cloches or row covers?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it depends on the temperature and, but generally not. If it's late enough in the season and you're in a greenhouse, and if the greenhouse is warm enough, then it wouldn't need to be protected. If you do lose the heat in your greenhouse, then yes, they would need to be. But generally, for example, like in my um in my cold frame, I just put them in the cold frame and don't have any protection in there. And it's just opening and closing of the cover is how I protect it against the temperatures.
Great. Thank you. That is it for all of the questions. So that is it for this week. Juliet, do you have any parting thoughts or comments?
I would just recommend that if people are interested, that they sign up for the next online seminar, which is going to be Monday, April 22nd at 12 o'clock. When one of our other master gardeners, Rose, who's been answering some of these questions, she will be speaking on how and when to start your edible plants from seed. So hope you can join us for the next seminar and that you'll sign up for that. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.